just so impressed with your two goals and also the diversity and equity statement. I'm really looking forward to seeing that more, and the ways in which you all are shaping our work around this, I think, can very much inform Sataran's work in general. So I'm also looking forward to the kinds of things that you're going to do during the next 2 days and how that's going to inform the larger enterprise of our work. So thank you all for being here.
Okay, so what I was thinking maybe we would do actually is just make sure we introduce some of the people who are not part of our fellows, right? I think that might be a nice thing. You may meet these people in later conversations, but can I, Tina, you've met, would that be okay? Those of you who are not fellows, OG or current cohort fellows, can you just give me a thumbs up and say if that's okay if I ask you to, perfect. So Virginia, would you mind introducing yourself, and then I can cold call other people who are new, who are not fellows.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here today and engage in these discussions. My name is Virginia Panish, and I am the director of the MAT program at UCI.
Thank you, Virginia. Tim, you're next on my screen.
Well, that's a good place to be. Hi, everyone. My name is Tim Dewar. I work at UC Santa Barbara, and there I am the coordinator of our single subject credential program, and also do content supervision for secondary ELA.
Perfect.
Great to meet everybody.
Thank you. Oh, Lorena, there you are. Hi. Yeah, Lorena, can you introduce yourself?
Lorena.
Ken. I knew I was going to see you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Lorena. I'm assistant professor at UCLA. Ken is my advisor when I was a grad student. So we can talk about these sort of layers of mentoring happening now. I'm very excited to see you all and to see you again, Ken. We haven't seen each other in a bit.
Oh.
I teach social foundations, language acquisition. I've done supervision, you name it. So excited to talk about it all with y'all.
And I think you and Ken, Lorena, just gave us some advisee goals, right? When your advisees and advisors show up with each other and they say, yay, you're here, I'm here. That's the kind of thing we can aspire to. I'm going to pass the mic to Ken Zeichner in just a minute. Let me give you a very short introduction. Ken is truly a beacon for us in this field and in this work. And one of the, but that's not really the reason we invited him here. The reason we invited him here is because some of the work, the forward-looking work that he's doing feels transformative. It's inviting a transformation at the a radical transformation, radical not in the sense of crazy or wild, but radical in the etymological sense of at its roots, right? Radical shares the same root word as radish, the sort of root. He's generously and gracefully, as I read it, suggesting that the field reconsider what its roots are about and where it draws its sustenance. And in particular, that's about questions, as I read it, questions about whose knowledge counts in teacher education and how our answers to that question, what good answers to that question might be and ways that we might move forward. I've asked Ken to speak informally. I'm trusting he'll do that, and boy, I cannot wait to hear what his thoughts are. So Ken, does that feel like adequate enough to hand it over to you, friend?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And cool. I hope this evolves quickly into a conversation. So I'm going to say a few things around what Jason asked me to talk about, which is the work I'm doing right now, and throw out a few things that I'm trying to dig deeper on. And I think some people have read some of my recent work on Teacher Ed 3.0 and democratic professionalism. And so I'll hopefully you'll give me some ideas that will help me as I go back to working on my book right after this. That's overdue already. So there's basically two things I'm working on currently. One is Linda Darling-Hammond and I are co-chairing a 3-year project for the National Academy of Education around the issue of evaluating and improving teacher education programs. I'm not going to really talk about that. You can ask me about that later. What I am going to talk about is I'm trying to write a book on communities and teacher education, which is a book coming out in a new teacher education series edited by Viv Ellis, who's now the dean at the University of Melbourne in Australia, called Communities and Teacher Education. That's part of a book utilizing Raymond Williams' notion of keywords, sort of taking concepts and really unpacking them to figure out what are the various dimensions, what are the different meanings, and to try to develop some conceptual clarity around those terms with regard to teacher education specifically. So I've been working on this book, trying to engage in an analysis of a wide variety of work in the United States and other countries that have been concerned with the issue of communities in teacher education. And that means a whole range of things. Since about the 1960s. One of the things that's concerned me the most over the years has been this sort of people saying that they've discovered something or we've had this great breakthrough, when always you can go back and trace the roots of those breakthroughs, and the idea we're always building on the work of others. And people coming into the field now, I find, often don't have a sense of that history. And I also tried to build my own work around my own personal history, my work history in education. And I think the issues that I've been concerned with over the years relate to sort of the unique or non-common kind of background I've had in education. I was a public school teacher in New York State, and all of my teaching was in a public community school during a time when there was a lot of organizing in urban communities, non-dominant urban communities that have been marginalized and lacked a voice in their public schools, trying to gain some influence on the schools they send their children to. So all of my teaching was in a context of a school in a primarily African-American community that was part of an effort to bring the community in and help govern the school. And so everything that we did as teachers was evaluated by the community, was part of the evaluation. We helped community help hire and fire teachers and distribute resources. And so it always seemed natural to me, the idea that teachers would be concerned about developing relationships with their students, families, and being knowledgeable of the community and trying to connect the teaching that we did inside the classroom to kids' lives outside of school. And my first job in teacher education was in the Teacher Corps, which was a program based on some work that Larry Cuban had done in Washington, D.C. for returned Peace Corps volunteers. And it was a program that was built on this tripartite notion of school, university, and community. Sharing responsibility for the preparation of teachers in Title I schools, urban and rural, around the country. And I was also a cooperating or mentor teacher before that. And that role was a hybrid role where I was employed both by the district and the university. So from the very beginning in teacher education, I've sort of been playing on both sides, in and out of these two different worlds, and very sensitive to the way in which people treated those of us who came out of the K-12 school world in the world of academia. My first 6 years, and this is, I guess, not common now, my first 6 years at the University of Wisconsin in Madison were as a clinical faculty member, responsible for building clinical programs and a research program on learning to teach in those programs. But I was non-tenure track. I decided after the 6 years to go up for tenure and switch over because I wanted to chair doctoral committees and they wouldn't let me do that as a clinical faculty member. But I've always been sort of tuned in to this notion of whose knowledge is listened to and whose knowledge counts. And I've been on the clinical end of being in two elite research universities, seeing the ways in which practitioner knowledge, K-12 educator knowledge is sort of second-class status or not listened to at all. And so my work a lot of it is focused on the notion of whose knowledge counts in the preparation of teachers, whose knowledge should count, and around school university partnerships, community university partnerships. And right now I'm trying to pull it all together in some fashion with this book. And so I've tried over the last several years a variety of different ways to conceptualize this sort of way in which I want to see teacher education become more open to different forms of knowledge and expertise in the preparation of teachers, because I think we at the universities do have some things to offer that are important, but there are other things that we can't offer, given our own, for most of us, background and experience, and given who the teachers are coming into teacher ed programs and their lack of familiarity with many of the communities they're going to end up teaching in. So I, for a while, played around with the idea of hybrid teacher education, third spaces, creating spaces where people can come together, where you begin to try to shift knowledge hierarchies. That to me is really important. To me, who's in the room and who's seated at the table is not really the issue. And for a lot of teacher education, that's often the issue. See, we have teachers at our meeting. See, we have parents here advising us on advisory committees. That doesn't really get at the kind of leveling of hierarchies that I've been trying to work on for many, many years. The term 3.0 I came up with during a time period when university teacher education was being trashed severely. There was huge money from venture philanthropy and other sources, including the US government, going into funding alternatives to university teacher preparation. We were failures, we were obsolete, we were being portrayed. All these new 2.0 programs were coming in and they were going to save us. And so I began sort of pushing back against that with this 3.0, suggesting that neither the university programs nor these alternatives really address the kinds of things that I thought were important. I had always been seen as sort of a critic of traditional forms of university teacher education, but suddenly I was portrayed by these deregulators as an apologist for the status quo, even though I spent most of my career trying to critique the sort of disconnect between clinical and coursework in teacher education programs and the lack of attention to communities and so on. And so 3.0 was a way to both make the point that what is coming along and being touted as a panacea for ills was not really that wonderful, and that there was something else that neither university or non-university teacher education achieved. But I decided that I began adopting the language of the social entrepreneurs, 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. And so I wanted to find another way, and I became intrigued with the work that's been going on for some time, a couple of decades, on the idea of democratic professionalism. And to me, it sort of conveys the idea that professionals, whether it's K-12 teachers or university teacher educators, do have things to offer. And we were hearing a lot of rhetoric that we didn't. Just we should pack up and go home because we had all this time and we failed to prepare high quality teachers for everyone's children who were going to stay in those schools over time. And so democratic professionalism became, I think, a useful way to think about, for me, teaching in the classroom. And there was an essay that I sent along to Jason. I don't know if it was distributed. That mostly it's coming out in a book on public education about teachers, K-12 teachers, and some of the things teacher unions in some parts of the country are doing to develop links with communities, to work together for the common good, so that universities are not just looking for communities to come into, help them do what we're set up to do, but also are joining up with communities to work on issues that they're already working on in many cases around achieving greater equity and justice in education and beyond. And so right now in this book, I'm trying to unpack what that means in teacher education, teacher educators as democratic professionals. What is that? And one of the things that I think is part of that for me is this idea of community engaged teacher educators. There are a number of people now who are arguing. Michelle Haddix at Syracuse University is one that I particularly like her work, where she argues her model of community-based teacher education or community engaged teacher education begins with herself. And this idea that we can't just tell our students, teacher candidates, to go out and work with families and communities in respectful and mutually beneficial ways. They have to be seeing us do it ourselves. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to unpack right now. What does that actually mean? And provide some examples from our own work at UW, as they call it, and in other places around the country. And one of those would be when I came to Washington in 2009. One of the first things I did was to become part of, we called it a study group of teacher education faculty. There were a few of us, American Indian Studies faculty on the campus, and tribal educators and tribal leaders around the state, including one of them who was a state legislator. And they would talk to us at length about what they thought about the work we were doing in the School of Education in relationship to their communities, and that included teacher education. And one of the things we heard over and over again was that teacher education was not really preparing teachers who really knew their students and knew much about their communities, and that and we were failing them. And what we're going to do about it. And they've been talking to the university for years and years, and nothing ever happens. And so we met for several years. A lot of it was uncomfortable, being in the receiving end of a lot of criticism. And so one of the things that emerged out of that was the development of a Native Education Certificate Program, which exists today. And you can go on the website and it's listed as one of the teacher education programs. Two of my colleagues, Megan Bang and Beth West, two Indigenous scholars at that time, both of them have left the university for other places, but the program still goes on. That provides, it focuses on preparing more Native teachers in the state, and also on ensuring that all people going through our teacher ed programs have knowledge about a new tribal sovereignty curriculum, time immemorial, that was optional at the time in Washington schools. It's now required. So everybody going through our teacher ed programs now at Washington is required to participate in this program that's led by Indigenous educators. And the thing about it was that the Indigenous communities in Washington worked with the teacher educators in shaping that program in ways that I think were very successful. And there are other examples of that where it's not just come in and tell us what you think of the programs that we have, and they go away and come back again, next year to share their reactions, but it's actually joining together and creating something new where the people who were on the outside, in this case, the community, develops, has a large role in developing the program. And we've also experienced that here since I've been here with regard to the development of a Seattle teacher residency program, where it took 3 years of sitting down and creating it, that involved the district, the community-based organization, the teachers union, and the College of Ed. And so those kinds of, I try to draw on those kinds of experiences in helping to push along this conceptualization. When you go into the literature on communities and teacher education, a lot of it is uses a lot of rhetoric, community engaged. as opposed, we're community engaged instead of just involving people. But what does that mean? There's a lot of maintenance of sort of deficit perspectives of communities, even with community engagement. And so there's a lot of things to be learned about what are the dimensions of variation in this work and what really matters in really preparing teachers in ways that they can begin to utilize the knowledge that they're gaining about communities and the expertise that they're gaining from families and communities in the work that they do in the classroom, sort of digging deeper. And so I'm actually optimistic about the future of teacher education in the sense that I think there's a lot of work going on where people recognize that the sort of trajectory that was followed in multicultural teacher education that really began to ascend in the 1960s and 70s as isolated coursework within programs that were done by certain people, often faculty of color, and nobody else should be, was concerned with that work. And it was only the individual courses and not the programs. But beginning to work and recognize that this really needs to be throughout teacher education programs, these commitments to work with both schools and communities in fundamentally different ways than we've been used to. And as Lorena will know, we tried to do some of that when we were both working in the programs in at UW with some success, but also generated a lot of resistance on the part of some of our colleagues. But we did manage, particularly in one of our programs, the elementary program, to embed across each quarter of the academic year some aspect of this program by, we had colleagues who were wanting to do that kind of work and who jumped right on board, but there was a lot of say turmoil as we went through that process. I don't think it's going to be an easy process. Sometimes I have questions about, can you do this work in university settings, in particularly elite research university settings? Can you do this kind of democratic work given the reward structures in those systems? And I don't know. There are some programs, like some of the residency programs, that have gone outside of the university and based the program outside of those bureaucratic structures of both the schools and universities and put them in community settings. That's what we did with our residency program for a variety of reasons. So I think it's not going to be easy, but I think there's greater recognition that the sort of old patterns of work, let's just develop a course, do some research on it, publish a study, and that doesn't recognize the complexity and the difficulty and the messiness of this work. But I think there are more and more people wanting to do that now. I think leadership is really important. I think the dean that UW has now, Mia Chuan, has really gathered together a group of people who want to do this work. And there are deans who take a leadership role. We weren't fortunate. In our case, when Lorena and I were working, we didn't have support at the top. There were a lot of things going on, including massive budget cuts. And so I don't know the sort of institutional home for this kind of work, but I think there's the fact that people are recognizing that the old models of let's just develop a course, publish a study, aren't gonna do it. And so maybe I'll stop there because I don't want to just go on and on. To hear your comments and questions.
Thanks, Ken. I've been frantically taking notes. I suspect a lot of other folks have. We've been, I think it's in this group, we've been experimenting with a way of getting questions out there and making room for multiple voices and reserving places. Did we do the stack thing in the chat before? Have we done that? Where in the chat, if you want to ask a question or jump in, if you just type the word stack, that will put your name visibly in the chat. You don't have to have your hand up. You don't have to do much else. Just get to reserve a space for yourself to ask a question or make a comment. We've already got one in there. Why oops? Maybe you're just practicing. any case, if you have a question or a thought, please jump into the chat, and that way we can manage the turn taking. Again, thanks so much, Ken. I don't think I'm alone in just having a bunch of stuff to be thinking about. I want to open it up to the floor.
And thank you, Dr. Zeichner, for being here today. A lot of your work and speeches have been a big part of my coursework so far, so it's really great to be able to talk to you and hear from you directly. I hope I'm not going to get too many eye rolls from this question, but I'm just wondering, hearing you talk about this democratic professionalism and community engaged teacher education, I'm just wondering how you see this fitting into the current political climate and how everything is getting demonized in the news, with CRT becoming this big kind of zeitgeist for all these other things. I saw a tweet today from the Texas Policy Institute where they were putting everything under the guise of critical race theory, including like community informed or you know, all these different important terms and ideas that we have in teacher education, and they were lumping them together to kind of demonize them. So I'm just kind of wondering how you see your work right now fitting in and pushing back against the current climate in towards these terms.
Well, yeah, I think about, you know, the idea of engaging communities in a greater way. And, you know, there's some communities out there, you know, around the country where that is problematic for me in terms of some of the things, as you say, that are going on. But I think my experience has only been in working in non-dominant communities that have been voiceless in their education of their children in the public schools. So these are communities have been shut out of the process. And so I haven't really had the experience of dealing with some of these communities that want, you know, critical race theory banned, or, you know, and that's, it's not just in red states, it's all over. I mean, we had teacher in Washington almost fired for teaching about Black Lives Matter in a district north of Seattle. I look at it as, I've been doing this kind of work for about 47 years. What we're experiencing right now is another version of what we've been experiencing the whole time I've been working in terms of this pushback, you know, and so I will continue, you know, trying to speak to ways in which schools and teacher ed programs should relate to non-dominant communities and move forward. I'm already on the list. And so is my son, who's a high school teacher in Seattle. The list for the Zen Education Project, you know, that was published in the Daily Caller of educators who want to destroy our country, and they didn't publish our addresses and phone numbers. But I mean, I'm looking at it in a sort of perspective over time, and it's a, you know, horrible thing going on, and it's going to cause lots of problems for educators in communities where there's not support for teaching the truth, as you know, the resolution from the Zen Education Project said. But I'm not deterred by that. I think we need to keep moving forward, because we can go back, you know, there was McCarthyism before I got involved, and there's been you know, things all along. And I, you know, these are tensions and contradictions. You know, I went back, I published a paper in 1991 in TC Record that dealt with some of these issues, and the examples I used were from Madison, Wisconsin, where people wanted to require, you know, everybody to celebrate Christmas and have Christmas trees in every classroom, and there were all sorts of negative pressures coming into schools, you know, criticizing educators for being too liberal with regard to sexual preference and so on, or teaching sex education in the schools there. And so what's going on is horrible, but I don't think, and I've been thinking about it a lot, you know, how do I want to speak in a book about these issues when there are a lot of different kinds of communities that have a lot of different ideas about what education should be. And I want to keep focused on the communities that I've been focused on for the whole time, but it's a difficult issue for educators and teacher educators. What, Florida, or is it Georgia? I can't remember. It's hard to distinguish anymore. The idea of hiring university people after taking, being examined for their political ideas, or surveying students in Florida for, and we had conservative organizations sending spies into classrooms when I was at UW-Madison, trying to, identify the leftist professors who should be fired. I don't know.
The fight, Ken, I hear you saying the fight goes on.
Yeah,
but it's not a new one.
No, it's not.
I want to do two things. One, I want to thank Lorena for modeling the sort of chat conversation. As we have thoughts about what we're hearing, we can always stick those into the chat. So that's a nice place to share what we're thinking. So thank you for that. And then I want to go ahead, Ken.
No, I was just thinking that point that Lorena just made, I think is extremely important. The idea that alliances, the communities, the K-12 educators and the teacher educators in higher education aligning together to fight on issues is a lot more powerful than the sort of divisions that have existed. We're sort of, I've often thought of it as fighting over the crumbs in education, K-12 competing against universities, public universities, and so on. And so that's the kind of working in solidarity with communities. That's part of the community engaged teacher education that I'm writing about in my book, is this sort of working in solidarity about issues that we have common interest in. And the strength that you have is much greater. Nobody's going to listen to a bunch of university professors, go in and complain about things related to teacher education, but the support, and it works. Certain teachers unions in Vancouver, the British Columbia Teacher Federation has had in their last few strikes support of the public in terms of, and that has furthered their ability to succeed. So
I want to pass the talking stick or the question stick or something to Stephen, who's got a hand up and also got stacked. And then the next person coming up will be, it looks like Christine. Go ahead, Stephen.
Hello, Dr. Zeichner. It's just an honor to get to talk to you right now. And so I wanted to make sure I articulate this question properly. And so my question is like, when we consider the prevalence of the alternative methods to teacher credentialing, which you have acknowledged throughout your research extensively, when we consider the teacher preparation model 3, how do we emphasize the importance of the community-driven teacher education programs over the alternative cost-effective models that prepare teachers at rapid rates within a capitalistic society, especially when these alternative methods are damaging the educational system as a whole?
I mean, that's a real, well, one of the ways I tried to challenge it was to start writing about venture philanthropy and what they were funding in teacher education and why I thought it was bad, and including writing in different ways about it. One of the things I did for the National Education Policy Center was a policy brief on what you're raising, these different kinds of teacher education programs and what we know. And it was aimed at policymakers in state and federal. And it was a whole different kind of writing. And so I had, and it was hard for me to begin to learn to write in ways that were not for an academic journal. But they mentored me in the process. I was very thankful for mentoring me. And I think that kind of work that comes out of that policy center, the policy briefs, that's one way we can begin to challenge it. Just publishing an article in AERJ is not going to go far in terms of having an influence on those policies that make it possible for those kinds of programs to accumulate so many resources and really do damage, I think. And I'm not speaking against alternative programs in general. There are some really good non-university programs that's one of the ideas of 3.0. It's you know, it's not just let's uncritically celebrate university programs and trash the other ones. It's something beyond that. But the ways in which we communicate, both for writing and speaking. You know, I was in a congressional briefing on clinical experiences a number of years ago in DC. And one of the issues I focus on is this underfunding of clinical teacher education, and speaking to people who are in a position to be able to provide some policies and resources to take a different direction that would make it more difficult for those programs you're alluding to exploit the current system and really do disservice to the communities that underprepared teachers. And so those are just a few things that come to mind right away. And so, and I see a lot of effort, I think it's good, toward the notion of public scholarship around these issues, so that learning in a doctoral program, I think, needs to include this sort of ability to speak about these issues to the public and to policymakers.
I want Zainab has a I got the stack order wrong, and we're still working out what that process, but Zainab was actually next. Zainab, would you mind, you said you'd be willing to read your question, that it just got typed in that way, but can you go ahead and share your question?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Ken. In hearing about your experience developing a native teacher education program, I'm very interested in that. And I was asking, when you talk about whose knowledge counts in teacher preparation, I was wondering if there is a way you conceptualize knowledge that helps conversations around teacher preparation design, implementation, and evaluation. I feel when community members come to the table, there are many ideas about knowledge: canonical knowledge, contextual knowledge, knowledge about the current situation, knowledge about the future. So is there a way that helps those conversations among different actors about what is knowledge?
Yeah, I think surfacing. I mean, a lot of what I've experienced over the years, where you bring teachers in or an advisory committee from the community, and I'm sitting there and watching, like, the university people sort of talk at people, and you know, the outsiders are just sort of sitting there, not speaking, or you know, to surface that process of the way in which you're going to operate and try to talk about the ways to establish some norms for participation, and to talk about the problems that have been experienced around those conversations across different worlds. And sometimes I've seen it's needed outside facilitation in certain situations I've been involved in where that is helpful. But I think you need to deal with it explicitly, because that's sort of the pattern over time. Is there are certain conceptions of knowledge and who has it, and what, and at what place are people brought in is another dimension of it. It's very more and more common for people, teachers, or community members to be brought in to react to something that's being conceptualized by university teacher educators, rather than being there from the beginning to help conceptualize it and plan it. One of the things that the work that Lorena and I were involved in, that we strove for, was to try to, we had 3 community organizers who were in the inside helping to plan with Lorena and others activities with teacher education candidates. And then there were others who came in and served as mentors. But the 3 people were involved in deciding, like, what we were going to do, how was it going to be set up, who would be involved in what, you know. And so that's another, in terms of looking at when are they brought in. And so I think really unpacking it and making it more explicit, and being able to, you know, for the native education certificate, it was at least a couple of my first 2 years here, and this study group had been going on before I arrived, of just working through some issues of distrust before you could even get to the place of trying to do something together. And some stuff had to come out that was not comfortable, but there were breakthroughs. And so you have to have those breakthroughs that disrupt sort of the typical ways of interacting in those hybrid settings where you bring people in with, the community people had histories of being shut out of those kinds of settings. And I don't know if that addresses what you asked, but why don't you tell me if it does or not?
Yes, thank you. I think it's a very valuable to think about. I work with indigenous communities in South America, so it's very useful. But what I'm trying to understand also is how you dismantle this hierarchy of knowledges, but also experiential knowledge might be a little bit different from knowledge, like what they call evidence-based statements, and so how that is played out.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one, because experiential knowledge does not fit in well in an elite university context. One of the things that was most powerful in the work that our community mentors did was were the personal experiences they brought in about how their kids have been treated by teachers in schools, how they had themselves been treated, and they told a lot of stories. And there was a lot of tension around that kind of pedagogy in the academy. And I remember somebody criticizing, saying, who are these people? Why are they here? All they do is tell stories. If you want them here, we have to teach them how to teach. We're the ones that know pedagogy or something. I don't remember the exact words, but it was this sort of failure to value the experiential knowledge that those mentors brought. But when we did some research with the teacher candidates, it was the storytelling, the authenticity, the passion that the mentors brought that really made a lot of teacher candidates stop and rethink what they had learned over their lives, what they had been doing unconsciously, and so on. And so you have to broaden, I think, the scope of the kind of knowledge that's valued in the academy. I had, the idea of teacher knowledge. I've spent many, many years, I did a lot of work on teacher action research over the years and writing about the value of knowledge that K-12 practitioners generate through examination of their practice, and tried to argue that us in the academy who do academic research need to pay attention to what people have learned who are K-12 teachers. In fact, we published a book one year that consisted of teacher action research studies from the Madison schools around issues of equity and justice. And in the last chapter, my 2 graduate students and myself tried to say, here are these studies done by practitioners, and here's where this is knowledge, to argue that this is legitimate knowledge, and here's where I think it connects with the academic research in the field by Geneva Gay and James Banks and Gloria Latson-Billings and so on. And so we were trying to broaden the notion of knowledge within the academic arena, including AERA. When I was vice president of AERA, I would oftentimes bring teacher research kinds of sessions into the process. And that same issue holds for teacher educators. A large portion of research in teacher education in the United States are people who practice teacher education, studying their own practice and doing research about their own work, and sort of broadening the ways in which knowledge is conceived, to value that as if it's well done, and that there are standards for evaluating these different forms of knowledge that are different than what's usually used in the academy. Sue Nafke and I wrote a chapter in the Handbook of Research on Teaching on practitioner research that dealt with these knowledge issues that I think could, connect to the question that you asked.
Ken, I have put a note in the chat that says this will need to be the last thing we
Right.
think through with you today. And Ken, thank you so much, and thanks to everyone. I also said, give you fair warning, that I've also said that I'm going to pursue a future conversation while we dig into some of these issues along our own pathways of work. Maybe I would love to have you back and join us in some back and forth conversations outside the context of a conference. I hope you'll be willing to think about that, Ken, moving forward. Thank you so much.
Yeah, if somebody wants to email me with a question or whatever, feel free to do that. If it's around these issues, because I'm thinking about this stuff almost 24 hours a day. I wake up in the middle of the night with an idea. I need to get this book done. So I'm happy to interact with you around any of these issues.